The village lay nestled between sacred hills where the wind carried stories and secrets alike. In this quiet place lived a girl named Nalia. She was known for her grace, her soft voice that told the most beautiful tales, and the strength behind her silence. But all of that faded the day her real mother died. Her father remarried a bitter woman named Mama Tamu, who ruled the home like a stone-hearted queen. Nalia's life became one of labor and isolation, her days filled with scrubbing, carrying water, and silence, while her stepsister Juma wore fine beads and slept through the morning sun. Nalia longed to go to school, to learn letters and legends, but her stepmother said, "What will books do for a girl who will marry mud?" Juma laughed, tossing a bracelet in the air. Even Nalia's father, once kind and full of love, became a quiet shadow in his own home. One evening, the village elders came to Mama Tamu's compound. Their faces were stern, and their voices were careful. A long-standing debt had to be paid. Years ago, Mama Tamu had been helped by a forest man during a terrible drought. In return, a promise was made, and now it had to be honored. The promise? That one daughter would be given in marriage to that man. The man was Baraka. Baraka lived at the edge of the village near the forest line no one dared cross. He was called the Cursed One by some, Forest Ghost by others. With a strange limp, deep-set eyes and a silence heavier than night, he walked the village rarely, mostly to trade herbs for salt or oil. Children ran when he passed. Women whispered behind veils. Nalia's heart dropped as the truth sank in. "But I am not even of age," she whispered. Her father stared at the ground. Her stepmother folded her arms. "A debt is a debt. At least someone will take you." Juma smiled from behind her mother's back, already planning how to wear the wedding beads meant for Nalia. The ceremony was quiet. No singing, no drums, no guests except the elders and the wind. Nalia's face was veiled, not in honor, but to hide shame. When it was over, her stepmother did not hug her. She simply walked her to the edge of the village, toward the narrow path that led to the forest's mouth. There stood a small shack, Baraka's home. "You will sleep where he sleeps, eat what he eats, and forget that you ever belonged to us," Mama Tamu said, pushing Nalia forward. Then she turned and walked away. Nalia stood there, frozen. Her bare feet touched the cold earth as she stared at the man who was now her husband, the village outcast with quiet eyes and a name carried on rumors. She had no dowry, no farewell, no choice. But deep in the trees, something stirred. Not just wind, something waiting. The forest stood like a wall of shadow and whisper, and at its edge was Baraka's home, a humble mud house with a thatched roof, worn by seasons but firm against the wind. Nalia approached with cautious steps, her heart heavy, her spirit bruised. She expected darkness, coldness, perhaps even cruelty. But when Baraka opened the door, he simply stepped aside, eyes lowered, and let her in without a word. Inside was silence, but not the kind that hurts. It was still, like a river just before dawn. Baraka showed her a small mat, laid out clean and carefully. He poured water into a wooden bowl and offered it to her with both hands. Then he sat quietly near the fire and didn't look at her again. That night, Nalia couldn't sleep. Her thoughts raced with questions. Who was this man? Why did he live like this? Why didn't he speak more? But Baraka never asked anything of her. He let her cry, let her breathe, let her be. Days passed, and the forest began to show its true face. Nalia noticed how birds landed near Baraka's feet, chirping like old friends. Squirrels brought him nuts and dropped them at his doorstep. Even the breeze that rustled the trees outside seemed to pause when he stepped through it. He wasn't like other men. He didn't boast. He didn't scold. He rose before the sun to gather herbs, and Nalia began to follow. He'd show her a leaf and say, "This eases pain." He'd point to a flower and say, "This speaks to fever." Slowly, gently, he taught her the language of the land. At night, he carved. Long, slow strokes into thick branches and fallen trunks. His hands moved with rhythm, almost like he remembered something. Nalia once peeked over his shoulder and froze. The symbol, she'd seen it once, in a scroll passed through the village years ago. A mark said to belong to the line of the forgotten kings. She said nothing. The forest, too, began to shift. When she once tripped on a thorny vine and bled from her foot, she returned the next day to find the same path clear. The thorns had bent away, almost as if they remembered her pain. She began to hum as she walked without realizing. One night, she awoke to a sound, not footsteps, not animals, but a voice. She stepped outside and saw Baraka standing beneath the moon, his hands lifted, his eyes closed. He was singing, not loudly, but deeply. The language was not one she knew, yet it held sorrow and beauty and history in every note. She felt her eyes well up. She didn't know why she cried, only that it felt like the song reached into her chest and touched something she'd buried. The next morning, he made her tea with roots and said nothing of her tears. Nalia realized something then. Baraka had never asked for her presence. He had never claimed her as his prize. Yet in his silence, he gave more peace than all the voices she'd grown up around. And in that silence, something ancient was awakening, not just in the forest, but in her. Back in the village, the wind carried more than just dust. It carried whispers. Juma, wrapped in fine cloth and dripping with jealousy, took every chance to mock Nalia's hut life. She laughed with the other girls at the well, saying, "Maybe my stepsister sleeps with frogs and speaks to leaves now." But even as her laughter echoed through the village, strange things began to happen. First, the goats. One by one they vanished from their pens, only to be found the next morning grazing peacefully near the edge of the forbidden forest. Next, the chickens. They wandered off into the trees and returned days later, fat and unbothered. Then came the stories of children. 2 boys from the northern hill disappeared during a game. Their parents wailed until the boys were found, calm and unharmed, sitting beside Baraka's home, chewing on wild mangoes as if nothing had happened. The elders raised their brows. "No one who enters the forest ever comes out the same," one muttered. "Yet this man lives beside it and walks in it like it knows his name." Nalia heard the rumors too. She tried to ignore them at first, but her heart kept returning to the way the trees moved for him, how the animals trusted him, how the earth beneath his steps seemed softer. One evening, as she sorted dried herbs, she turned to him and asked quietly, "Baraka, who are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to a small wooden box hidden beneath a bundle of cloth in the corner. He brought it to her. It was made of carved ivory, smooth and glowing faintly in the firelight. Intricate symbols danced across its surface, birds in flight, moons shifting, lions roaring. "I was not born in this village," he said softly. "I was sent here, hidden here, for a reason I was too young to understand." Nalia held the box carefully in her hands. It was heavier than it looked. "What's inside?" she whispered. Baraka's gaze met hers for the first time in days. Deep, steady, ancient. "When the time is right," he said, "take it to the tree that listens. It will know what to do." Nalia didn't ask which tree. Somehow, she already knew. That night, she had a dream unlike any she'd ever had. The forest stood before her, but it wasn't dark. It glowed, like the fire inside a sacred drum. In the center stood Baraka, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a lion. Its mane shimmered like gold. Its eyes burned like starlight. And behind them, the trees parted, bowing in silence. She woke up with her heart pounding. The box still rested beside her bed, untouched, but humming with quiet power. Something inside her whispered, "Nothing about Baraka is what it seems." And the wind, it was no longer just wind. It was trying to speak. The sky was pale with worry the day the palace drums stopped. Word travelled fast. The chief's only son, a boy of only 9, had fallen gravely ill. His skin burned with fever, and his body trembled as if haunted by something unseen. The palace sent word to every healer in the land, but none could ease the child's suffering. The village buzzed with fear. Juma, ever thirsty for attention, wrapped herself in golden beads and painted her hands with ash. She strutted to the palace, claiming she had studied rare herbs, that her stepfather taught her secret cures. "Let me near the child," she said confidently, "and I will heal him." But her act crumbled quickly. The palace guards watched as her herbs crumbled in her trembling hands. Even the chief's advisor, an old man with eyes like iron, turned away in disappointment. Then someone whispered, "What about the forest outcast? The one who healed the fever girl without even touching her?" Another chimed in, "He lives where the birds speak and the vines part. They say he walks with the forest." And so a summons was sent, not just to Baraka, but to Nalia too. When they entered the palace courtyard, silence followed them like a shadow. All eyes fell on Baraka, his walking staff carved with ancient symbols, familiar to a few old enough to remember the royal era. Some gasped. One elder whispered, "That's the symbol of the crescent line, the lost blood." Baraka said nothing. Inside, the chief's son lay motionless. Baraka placed his hand gently on the boy's forehead. He whispered to the wind through the window, then knelt and pulled herbs from his pouch, roots no healer dared use, believed to be cursed. But Baraka mixed them with water, sang to the cup softly, and let the boy drink. By morning, the child opened his eyes. Cheers erupted. The queen fell to her knees weeping. "What gift do you ask for this miracle?" the chief asked. Baraka only replied, "Let those who are forgotten be remembered." Nalia stood nearby, watching the man who once lived in silence now bathed in quiet awe. People began to murmur. "He speaks the old tongue. His herbs grow only in royal gardens. Only the priests of the ancient kings knew those songs." But while reverence grew in the palace, back in the village, Juma seethed with jealousy. She could not bear it. Nalia being called blessed, Baraka standing proud, people bowing to the one she once mocked. Her bitterness burned like dry wood. That night, she crept into Nalia's hut while they were away. There, beneath the sleeping mat, she found it, the ivory box. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, nestled in velvet cloth, was a golden medallion. Its edges were shaped like lion claws, and in the center, engraved in the old royal script, was a name, Baraka, son of Kivuli. Juma dropped the box. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough. He wasn't just a healer. He wasn't just an outcast. He was someone meant for a throne. And Nalia was now part of something far bigger than any of them had imagined. The palace was still when the chief summoned Baraka to his private chamber. The drums had gone quiet, and the guards stood at attention, not with suspicion, but with a strange reverence that hadn't been there before. Baraka entered silently, his staff echoing softly against the smooth stone floor. Nalia stood outside the chamber doors, her heart pounding, unsure of what was unfolding, but knowing it was something that would change everything. Inside, the chief dismissed his advisors. "You healed my son with roots that grow only in sacred soil," he began, voice low. "You carved symbols only the royal artisans were ever taught. Who are you?" Baraka stepped forward. For the first time, he removed his outer cloak. Beneath it, near his collarbone, was a mark, dark, curved like a crescent moon, encircling a lion's eye, the royal crest. The chief inhaled sharply and stumbled back a step. "That mark." Baraka nodded. "I am Baraka, son of King Kivuli. He was betrayed by his own brother during the last harvest moon. Soldiers stormed the palace. The royal priestess smuggled me out wrapped in firewood, hidden in the back of a farmer's cart. I was only a boy. I don't remember the throne, only the running, the hiding." He looked down, then smiled faintly. "The forest took me in. Or perhaps the forest had always been waiting." The chief sat in silence, piecing the puzzle together. "Then you are the last of the bloodline." "I was never lost," Baraka said, "only waiting to be remembered." Outside the door, Nalia's breath caught in her chest. She hadn't meant to listen, but now her knees felt weak. This man, the one she had been forced to marry in shame, the one she had walked beside in the forest, cried within silence, was born of royal blood. But in her heart, she already knew. Later that evening, as the sun bled gold over the treetops, Baraka found Nalia sitting beneath the tree that listened. He sat beside her quietly. "I'm sorry I never told you," he said. She looked up, eyes wide, searching his face for something that had always been there. I think I've known for a while. Not in my head, but my heart recognized you long before my eyes did." Baraka turned to her, his voice lower now. "You were the only one who never asked who I was, just who I could become." She didn't answer with words. She simply took his hand. Because names didn't matter to Nalia. Not thrones. Not bloodlines. She had seen the man before the crown. And now the world was finally catching up. When the truth spread through the village like morning fire through dry grass, people reacted with awe, guilt, and disbelief. Some wept openly, remembering the day they had turned their backs on the limping man with downcast eyes. Others fell silent, unsure how to approach the man they once called the Cursed One. But none reacted more dramatically than Mama Tamu. She arrived at the palace in her finest wrapper, adorned in gold she had hoarded over the years, claiming she had always known Baraka's worth. She stood before the chief and declared, "It was I who arranged the match. I saw his spirit, his potential. I knew my Nalia was worthy of royalty." Baraka said nothing. But the forest elder stepped forward. An old woman with eyes as bright as embers, she had been quiet until now. She raised a hand, and the crowd stilled. "Let truth speak," she said. "There was a prophecy, whispered among trees, buried in ash. It said, 'Only a girl who can love the forgotten, without question or condition, shall awaken the king who walks unseen. That girl is not the one who hoards gold or spins lies.'" She turned to Nalia, and her gaze softened. She gave her heart without knowing his crown. That is the crown. Mama Tamu's face turned pale. She tried to speak, but the crowd had turned away from her. Nalia's father, who had stood in silence for so long, now bowed his head. "I failed you," he said to Nalia. "I failed your mother's memory." She didn't answer. Forgiveness would come in time, but not today. As for Juma, she arrived cloaked in fury and fear. She screamed about injustice, about being overlooked. But when the chief announced her banishment from the palace, Baraka intervened. "She is still young," he said. "Let her learn from the roots she once trampled." Juma was assigned to the palace gardens, silent sacred grounds where only the humbled were allowed to work. There, she would tend to the herbs that once mocked her ignorance. And then came the day of Baraka's crowning. It was not held in the palace, but in the open field where earth met sky. The villagers gathered beneath the tree that listens, where drums throbbed like heartbeats and songs rose like smoke. The air smelled of sandalwood and fresh rain. Baraka stood in white robes, his staff polished and gleaming, crowned not with diamonds, but with carved branches and lion's hair. When he was asked who would stand as queen, he turned, eyes searching only for one face. Nalia stepped forward, barefoot, her hair braided in the style of river maidens. She wore no jewels, only a simple sash made of forest silk. Not a queen of gold, Baraka said, but a queen of grace. He held out his hand. She took it. The crowd bowed, not because they were told, but because their hearts demanded it. The wind rose then, brushing through Nalia's scarf, as if blessing her, and in that moment, the tale was sealed. The girl they tried to discard became the woman their king trusted with his soul. The village had never seen such a celebration. From the sacred hills to the riverbanks, drums echoed like thunder wrapped in joy. Smoke from cooking fires spiraled into the sky as families prepared feasts, not just for the palace, but for every soul in the village. It wasn't only the crowning of a king they were celebrating. It was the return of something ancient, something just. Elders dressed in ceremonial cloth stood in a circle beneath the tree that listens. They sang blessings in the old tongue, their voices carried by the wind as firelight flickered across their faces. River dancers, painted in clay and wrapped in silk, swayed like reeds in the water, moving with the rhythm of time itself. Nalia emerged, not in gemstones, but in a robe the colour of earth after rain. Her crown, shaped by the village's finest carvers, was made of polished ebony leaves. It shimmered, not from gold, but from meaning, each leaf symbolising life, humility, and strength rooted in truth. Baraka stood beside her, smiling gently as children who once ran from him now clung to his arms, climbing his legs, giggling as if he were one of them. His face, once marked by solitude, now glowed with warmth. In the days that followed, Baraka kept his first promise to the village. He built the healing house, a place for the forgotten, the sick, the unwanted. It stood near the edge of the forest, surrounded by medicinal trees and open to all, healed by the land, healed by love. And Nalia, now queen not by title, but by action, began teaching village girls under a shaded grove. She taught them to write their names, to read the stars, and to listen when the earth spoke. Not all voices come from mouths, she told them. Some speak through roots, and some through silence. Even Mama Tamu, now stripped of pride, began to visit the healing house. No one turned her away, not even Nalia. Under the soft sun and beside the old tree, a new legacy began. One built not on inheritance, but on intention. And when the wind rose, carrying the scent of herbs and river water, a voice whispered softly over the land. They tried to bury us in silence, but we learned to speak with roots, and the roots remembered. Years passed, and the village flourished like a field kissed by constant rain. The once forgotten land became a place of healing, of story, of renewal. The forest that once loomed with shadows now stood as a sanctuary, sacred and revered. Near its edge, under the wide arms of the ancient fig tree by Baraka's old hut, children gathered every week. Their eyes were wide, their feet bare, their hearts open. An old storyteller, wrapped in a shawl of woven moons and suns, sat on a wooden stool carved with vines. She began, as she always did, with the same words. Long ago, a girl was forced to marry a forgotten man, but she never forgot how to hope. The children leaned in, mouths open, as she spoke of Nalia, the girl of grace, and Baraka, the man with forest in his veins. She told of outcasts and crowns, of thorns that stepped aside and songs that healed. Not far from them, a woman sat beneath the shade, her hands folded gently in her lap. Her silvered hair was tied with forest silk, her face softened by time. It was Queen Mother Nalia, still graceful, still listening. She didn't speak much now, but her presence was enough. The children often turned to catch her nodding gently, as if confirming that yes, the stories were true. At the palace gate, a small box rested atop a stone pedestal. The ivory box, once stolen and opened in envy, was now sealed with a wax crest. Each year, during the harvest moon, it was opened before the village, and every time, without fail, something new appeared inside. A scroll of old wisdom, a leaf that never wilted, a stone that sang when touched by rain. No one knew how. They only believed. Baraka, now older, walked slower, but with purpose. Each year, he planted a tree in a place where sorrow once bloomed, near broken homes, forgotten graves, abandoned paths. Over time, the village map turned green with memory. And yet, despite the growing fields and growing stories, he still returned often to the tree that listens, to sit in stillness, hand in hand with Nalia, saying nothing at all, because some love never needs to be spoken again. It simply becomes the soil for everything after. And as dusk fell, the storyteller ended with a voice that trembled like a breeze. He was cast out to be forgotten, but she saw him, not with fear, but with faith. And that was how a broken kingdom remembered its heart.